Step outside at 6:15 in the morning, before you've touched anything warm, and stand there for 1 minute in whatever the air happens to be. Somewhere in the next 90 seconds your skin will register the temperature and send a message inland, toward a small cluster of cells above your kidneys that have been waiting since roughly 4 a.m. to do exactly this. Here's the answer plainly. Your body produces its sharpest natural surge of alertness in the first 30 to 45 minutes after waking, driven by cortisol and norepinephrine, and cold air is the oldest, most direct trigger for it. Coffee is a chemical borrowed on top of a system that was already firing. That's the fact, and it will mislead you almost immediately, because if you take that to mean cold shower good, coffee bad, you'll do the wrong thing at the wrong hour and blunt the very surge you're trying to catch. Why would that be? Because timing is the whole mechanism, and almost nobody talks about the timing. The surge I'm describing has a name, the cortisol awakening response, or CAR, and it isn't a vague morning energy. It's a measurable spike of the hormone cortisol that rises around 50% above your already climbing waking level, peaking somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes after your eyes open. Cold exposure lands cleanly on top of that curve and amplifies it. Caffeine, taken in the same window, does something stranger. It doesn't add to the surge, it flattens the part of it you most need. Stay with me, because the reason for that involves a molecule most people have never heard of, and once you understand it, you'll never drink coffee at the same hour again. Let me place the character of this story on the stage properly. It isn't caffeine, and it isn't cortisol. It's a small, patient molecule called adenosine. Think of adenosine as sand falling into the bottom half of an hourglass all day long. Every hour you're awake, your brain burns fuel, and one of the leftovers of burning that fuel is adenosine, piling up, slowly, grain by grain. The more of it that accumulates, the heavier and more tired you feel. That's not poetry. That is, mechanically, a large part of what sleepiness is. And here is the part that reframes your whole morning. While you sleep, your brain clears that sand out. You wake with the hourglass nearly empty. At 6:30 in the morning, you are not tired. Your adenosine is at its lowest point of the entire 24-hour cycle. So what does caffeine actually do? Caffeine doesn't give you energy. It can't. There's no fuel in it. What caffeine does is fit into the exact receptor that adenosine normally plugs into, like a key that fits the lock but won't turn it. It blocks the tiredness signal. That's the whole trick. Which raises the obvious question. If your adenosine is already at rock bottom at 6:30, what is there for the caffeine to block? Almost nothing. You're aiming a fire extinguisher at a fire that hasn't started. You feel a lift, yes, but a good part of that early lift is caffeine nudging cortisol, the same hormone your body was about to spike on its own, for free. Now here's where the timing turns from interesting to costly. Caffeine has a half-life in the average adult of around 5 to 6 hours. Drink a strong cup at 6:45, and at nearly noon, half of that caffeine is still circulating, still occupying adenosine receptors. But your brain doesn't stop making adenosine just because the doors are blocked. The sand keeps falling. It piles up behind a blocked receptor, waiting. And when the caffeine finally clears in the early afternoon, all of that backed-up adenosine floods in at once. That's the 2 p.m. crash. It isn't a lack of coffee, it's the arrival of a bill you deferred at breakfast. The honest move is to let the receptors fill and clear on their natural schedule, and to spend your first hour amplifying the surge you already have, rather than chemically faking one. How do you amplify it? This is where cold comes in, and where it gets genuinely surprising. When cold air or cold water hits your skin, temperature-sensing nerves fire a fast signal to the locus coeruleus, a tiny, blue-tinged knot of cells in the brainstem, the single largest source of norepinephrine in your entire brain. The name means blue spot, which is literally what it looks like under a microscope, stained blue by the pigment its neurons carry. When cold triggers the locus coeruleus, it releases norepinephrine, the brain's own version of the alertness signal, distinct from adrenaline and far more targeted. In one study of cold water immersion, plasma norepinephrine rose by roughly 2.5 to 3 times baseline and stayed elevated for a good while after. That's a cleaner, longer, more physiological version of what people are chasing in a cup, and it costs nothing but the willingness to be uncomfortable for a minute. But I want to be straight with you about the size of that number, because this is exactly where health content lies to you. You'll see that 530% dopamine increase from cold water figure passed around constantly, framed as though a cold shower rewires your reward system for the whole day. That number is real. It came from a 2000 study in the Czech Republic. But it was measured after a full hour in 14-degree water, not a 2-minute shower. The mechanism is real. The effect from your ordinary morning cold exposure is smaller and shorter than the internet promises. I'd rather you know the drill works for solid reasons than believe a headline that falls apart the first time you check it. The norepinephrine surge is dependable. The dopamine claim is inflated in the retelling. So why does cold work so precisely in the morning and not, say, at 9 p.m.? Because the cold signal doesn't act alone. It lands on a stage that's already been set by your circadian clock. There's a master timekeeper in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. About 20,000 neurons sitting just above where your optic nerves cross. Every morning it does two things almost simultaneously. It commands that cortisol awakening response, and it primes your entire sympathetic nervous system to be responsive. Cold at 6:30 is a match struck in a room already filled with the right air. Cold at night lands in a room the clock has deliberately emptied, which is why a cold plunge late in the evening can wreck your sleep, spiking alertness precisely when your body is trying to release melatonin and drop its core temperature to fall asleep. Have you ever noticed that stepping into cold air first thing makes your mind feel scrubbed clean in a way a warm shower never does? That's not imagination, and it's not toughness. That's norepinephrine hitting the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain behind your forehead that handles focus and decision-making, sharpening the signal-to-noise ratio between neurons. You've felt it. You just filed it under waking up, instead of recognizing it as a specific chemical event you can deliberately trigger. Now, why do I keep saying your body was designed for this? Because for nearly all of human history, the moment of waking was a moment of cold. Our ancestors didn't open their eyes in a sealed, climate-controlled bedroom held at a constant 21 degrees. They woke as the fire died down, in the coldest part of the night-to-dawn cycle, and the cold itself was part of the waking signal. A thermal alarm clock that pulled the body up into readiness. Your physiology still expects that thermal drop. The problem is, modern life deleted it. You wake into warmth, under a warm duvet, in a warm room, and then reach for a hot drink, 3 warm inputs in a row, when the system was calibrated to expect a cold one. The grogginess so many people fight through in that first hour isn't a caffeine deficiency. It's a missing temperature signal. Let me give you the physical model that makes this stick. Because this is a hydraulics problem as much as a hormonal one. Picture your circulation on a cold morning like a plumbing system responding to a drop in outside temperature. Cold on the skin causes vasoconstriction. The small blood vessels near the surface clamp down to conserve heat, pushing blood inward toward your core and your brain. It's the same reason a plumber shuts outer valves to protect the central pipes in a freeze. That inward shift means a temporary rise in the blood and oxygen reaching your brain and vital organs at the exact moment you need to think clearly. Warmth does the opposite. It opens the peripheral vessels, pools blood toward your skin, and leaves you feeling loose and a little foggy. So the hot shower that feels wonderful is, in circulatory terms, sending your resources in the wrong direction for waking up. Here's the recognition beat I suspect will land for a lot of you. If you've ever felt more genuinely awake after being caught outside in cold rain than after a full cup of coffee, clearer, oddly better, not just cold, that's the whole mechanism firing in real time. Your locus coeruleus lit up, norepinephrine flooded your cortex, blood rushed to your core, and your circadian stage was already set. You got the real thing by accident. What I'm describing is how to get it on purpose, at the right hour, every day. So what's the actual protocol? I'll give it to you in full, because a mechanism you can't act on is just trivia. You don't need an ice bath, and you don't need to buy anything. If there's a free version, I'm not going to send you shopping. Step 1. Within the first 10 to 15 minutes of waking, before coffee, get cold on your skin. The simplest version is to open a window or step outside for 2 to 3 minutes in whatever you slept in, letting the cold air hit exposed skin. Face, neck, forearms. Step 2. If you want the stronger dose, end your morning shower with 30 to 90 seconds of cold as your tap runs, letting it hit the back of your neck and upper spine, where the large surface veins carry the signal inward fast. Not a gentle cool down, a clear, uncomfortable cold that makes you breathe sharply. That sharp involuntary breath is the locus ceruleus responding. It's the sign it's working, not a sign to stop. If even that one step, cold before caffeine, is new to you, hit like now, because it's the single change most people feel within 3 days, and the algorithm only shows this to the next person if it sees that signal. Step 3, and this is the one that ties it together. Delay your coffee, not forever. 90 to 120 minutes after waking. If you wake at 6:30, your first coffee lands around 8 to 8:30. Why that window? Because that's when your cortisol awakening response has peaked and begun its natural decline, and adenosine has started to genuinely accumulate. Now caffeine has something real to block, and you're not spending it against an empty hourglass or blunting a cortisol spike you didn't need help with. People who make this one change most often report the thing they least expected, that the afternoon crash they'd lived with for years simply softened or vanished. Not because they drank less, because they drank at the right hour. Which raises a harder question, and it's the one that reorganized how I think about all of this. If caffeine works by blocking adenosine, and your brain responds to that blockade by building more adenosine receptors over weeks, which it does, that's tolerance. That's why your 2 cups became 4. Then what exactly are you waking up to on a normal morning? Here's the uncomfortable answer. A habitual heavy coffee drinker who skips their morning cup doesn't feel neutral. They feel worse than a non-drinker, foggy, headachy, flat. That's not the coffee's true baseline lift. That's withdrawal being relieved. A large part of what many people experience as coffee working is coffee undoing a deficit that coffee itself created. The cold-driven surge has no such trap. Norepinephrine from cold exposure doesn't build tolerance the way caffeine does. You get the lift, and you don't spend tomorrow paying for today. If that just reframed what your morning coffee is actually doing, and there's one more layer coming that's stranger than the caffeine trap, about what cold does to a fuel your body has almost forgotten how to use. Subscribe now, because that section is a few minutes away, and it's the reason I made this whole thing. Let me be fair to coffee though, because I'm not here to demonize it, and the science doesn't support demonizing it. Coffee is one of the largest sources of antioxidants in the modern diet. Large cohort studies, following hundreds of thousands of people over years, associate 2 to 4 cups a day with lower rates of type 2 diabetes and Parkinson's disease, and reduced all-cause mortality. Some researchers argue the benefit is really from the plant compounds, the chlorogenic acids, not the caffeine at all, and honestly, that debate isn't settled. The point was never that coffee is bad. The point is that when you drink it matters enormously, and that using it as your first-hour wake-up mechanism wastes both its benefits and your body's own free surge. Now here's the stranger layer I promised, and it pulls in a field most people never connect to their coffee cup: thermodynamics. When you get cold, your body has to make heat, and it has 2 ways to do it. The first is shivering, muscles firing uselessly to generate warmth through friction. The second is quieter and far more interesting: non-shivering thermogenesis, run by a tissue called brown adipose tissue, or brown fat. Brown fat isn't storage fat, it's the opposite. It's fat whose entire job is to burn fuel and release the energy as pure heat. It's packed with mitochondria, the cell's furnaces, and those mitochondria are stained brown by the iron in them, which is where the name comes from. Here's the thermodynamic sleight of hand that makes brown fat remarkable. In a normal cell, mitochondria burn fuel to make a molecule called ATP, the cell's energy currency, like a battery being charged. Brown fat cells have a protein called UCP1, uncoupling protein 1, that essentially pokes a hole in the process. The fuel gets burned, but instead of charging the battery, the energy escapes directly as heat. Picture a dam where instead of the water turning turbines to make electricity, you open a bypass channel and let it crash straight down, releasing all its energy as warmth and noise. That's what UCP1 does. It uncouples burning from storing. And cold is the single most powerful natural switch to turn it on. For decades, physiologists believed adults had essentially no brown fat, that it vanished after infancy, when babies needed it to survive because they can't shiver effectively. Then in 2009, 3 separate teams, publishing in the New England Journal of Medicine, used PET scans and found active, functional brown fat in adults, concentrated around the neck and collarbones and along the spine. Not a trace. Working deposits, switched on by cold. That single finding reopened a field everyone had closed. Which is exactly why I told you to aim the cold water at the back of your neck and upper spine. That's not arbitrary. That's where the deposits sit. Now, honest uncertainty, because this is where the field is still arguing. Whether regular morning cold exposure meaningfully increases your brown fat over months, and whether that translates into changes you'd actually notice in metabolism or body composition, is genuinely unsettled. Some studies show cold acclimation expands brown fat activity. Others show the metabolic effect in the average person is modest. I'm not going to tell you cold showers melt fat. That's the kind of overclaim I opened this by warning you about. What's solid is the alertness mechanism, the norepinephrine, the circadian timing. The brown fat is a real and fascinating bonus whose long-term size we're still measuring. Depending on which researcher you ask, it's either a meaningful metabolic lever or a minor one. The truth is still being pinned down. Let me return to the clock one more time, because everything here comes back to the clock. Your body runs on a temperature rhythm as much as a light rhythm. Your core temperature reaches its lowest point roughly 2 hours before you naturally wake, then begins climbing, and that rising temperature is itself part of the wake signal. When you add cold to your skin in that first hour, you're working with the grain of a rhythm that's already lifting you. The cold makes the internal furnace work. Core temperature ticks up, cortisol peaks, norepinephrine floods, blood shifts inward. Every one of those is a system your body was going to run anyway. You're not forcing anything. You're removing the modern warmth that muffles it. There's a question I want you to sit with, because I genuinely wonder about the answer across the people watching this. When did waking up become something you needed a chemical to accomplish? For most of human history, there wasn't a substance involved in getting up. There was light and cold, and the simple fact of the day beginning. The system worked. It still works. It's sitting inside you right now, fully intact, just muffled under 3 layers of warmth and a habit you inherited without questioning. I find that genuinely hopeful rather than grim. Nothing is broken. The wiring is all there. So let me leave you with the one decision that's actually in front of you tomorrow morning, because this channel is about what you do when the alarm goes off, not what you admire in theory. Tomorrow, when you wake, don't reach for the kettle first. Get cold for 2 minutes, window, air, or the end of the shower. Then give it 90 minutes before the coffee. One morning. See whether the fog you've been drowning in caffeine was ever really about caffeine at all. Tell me in the comments the next day, was your afternoon different? I want to see how many of you feel it, because I think the split will surprise even me. And if there's someone in your life who can't function until their second cup and blames themselves for it, share this with them, because it was never a character flaw. It was a timing mistake, and timing is the easiest thing in the world to fix. You were never meant to be woken by a cup. You were meant to be woken by the morning itself.